Hi, I'm Amy Shannon from Amy's Bookshelf Reviews
Good
podcast,
evening,
where
listeners.
stories
I'm Amy
speak,
Shannon,
voices
and welcome
matter,
to
and
Amy's
words come
Bookshelf
alive.
Reviews
If you
podcast.
are following this
Conversations,
on
revelations, and
Spotify,
inspirations behind the book.
please
You never know where the
follow the
conversation will lead us, so
podcast.
let's find out.
Um,
Tonight we have a guest
Now,
with us.
the
Thank you for joining us,
interviewees
and will you please
uh,
introduce
have
yourself
the
and let
option
people
of
know how they
having an
can connect with you?
audio-only podcast session
Hello,
or a
Amy.
video
Hello, Amy.
podcast
My name is
session.
Vincent
This
Donovan,
is
and
a video
readers can
podcast
contact me
session,
on my
and I
website,
hope that you enjoy it. It
vincentdonovanbooks.com.
will also
Great, and I'll
be
have that
shown on
information in the
YouTube.
description
So
of
if
this
you are
episode when it
watching
airs.
this on
Okay.
YouTube,
So,
please
I've been
subscribe.
reading your
Thank you.
books for quite a while, and you came out recently with Secret Seeds, correct? I want to make sure I remember that. So, first of all, how long have you been writing?
That's an excellent question. Would probably need a whole other podcast to talk about it. But I've always had a love for literature and creative writing. And actually, I remember when I was in grammar school having to memorized a speech by Robert Kennedy, and he said in that speech, some men see things as they are and ask why. I see things that never were and say why not. And to me, that saying has stayed with me, and I loved writing. I always have. My teachers nurtured that in grammar school and in high school. I went to Merrimack College, got a BA in English, and then the recession hit when I got out of school, and I went back for an MBA and I brought a family up. But about 25 years ago, my two daughters really urged me to embrace the muse that I always had, and I started down that path. And it's been an interesting one. My fifth novel has just come out. I had the first novel published in 2016, but I've had just a wonderful experience in meeting people. That's truly the reward of writing is meeting the people on this journey and hopefully sharing with them some of the epiphanies that they get out of reading the books.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, I've been writing since I could write,
Mhm.
um, and it was always, even before that, I would just tell stories and make them up. I remember being 3 and only being able to say, talk about the 3 bears, and I didn't like the ending, so I created my own story of it, and then I just made up my own. And whenever I was in trouble, I always exaggerated my whole story to kind of like, I felt if I distracted my parents with a very long story, they'll be like, "Oh, just shut up and go away."
You're right.
Sometimes it usually worked with my dad, but not with my mom.
Yeah.
Dad was like, "Okay, all right, I understand." But so I really I enjoy I love reading your stuff.
Thank you,
Um
Amy.
and it's a joy when I see, "Oh yes, can you read this?" Of course. It's something that I just love to do. So how many books have you published?
This is my fifth book, actually. And what I would like to say, I probably the readers might get a kick out of this, is that in each book, I use a metaphor in the back of my head. And my wife and I went to see an exhibit by Joseph Wheelwright a number of years ago. And what Joseph does is he goes in the woods and he looks for the perfect tree configuration. And what he does is he takes the tree out of the ground, turns it upside down. So the root ball becomes a head and the leaves become the branches and the arms. And basically,
Nice.
to me, that's a metaphor of the novels that I write, is that all these characters need to turn their life upside down in order to go through a journey of self-discovery. And through that journey, they grow stronger through perseverance and through faith, and they discover some timely lessons on that way. And that metaphor has always stayed with me. I would absolutely recommend any readers or any of the listeners to your podcast, just Google Tree Men, and you'll see an unbelievable exhibit and collection by Joseph Wheelwright, which I actually sent him one of my
that
books because I was so inspired by him. Yes.
that no, that is great, because I was going to ask you about your inspiration. Obviously, it
Mm.
sounds like you have the support and backing of your family, which is really a great thing to have. I have 4 sons, and I have 3 sons that actually like me and
Mm.
they support everything that I write. And it's a good feeling to know that you have that, you know. And so you so Secret Seeds, what was your thinking before you wrote it?
I have a wonderful, thank you for that question. I've been thinking an awful lot about that, getting ready for this podcast. So, basically, the story came to me after a visit my wife and I took to Alaska back in 2023. And if I may just for a second, just read something. So I became fascinated by the life cycle of sockeye salmon. And I actually mentioned it in the novel. I say that the young spend time in rivers and lakes before migrating to the ocean. Then a few years later, they head back to freshwater to spawn. They stop eating once they enter freshwater and rely on their energy stores to travel hundreds of miles, fighting to make it back where they were born. Only 1 out of 1,000 make it home to spawn, but none get lost. It's like they follow a beacon home. Afterward, they have no energy to return to the ocean and die. So to me, what came out of it is because at that time when I was thinking about that life cycle and the journey upstream, I saw it as a metaphor for sacrifice, instinct, and legacy. And at that moment in time, my news feed was overwhelmed with stories about the border and about UFO sightings. And I saw these interesting threads that I could perhaps pull together. And basically, the story of Secret Seeds is about a mother who's an undocumented farm worker who finds herself here in the States after a terrible tragedy, finds a gentleman who she moves in with, who she hopes and believes and loves will be her lifesaver, who in fact becomes quite abusive, and she needs to break away from that relationship. And because of that, she puts one of her daughters, what she thinks is a safety net, but in fact is a trap. And it just really just goes from there into a whole incredible journey. But to me, the entire story is really about characters trying to swim upstream and what that's about. And the deeper I got into it and the more I thought about it, Secret Seeds is basically a modern day Scarlet Letter, because Hawthorne wrote about Hester Prynne and some of the shame and disgrace that she went through. Well, the main character here in Gabrielle Ruiz, she also faces shame in the U.S. and what she has to go through to persevere and to reclaim her identity and to save her family is amazing. And matter of fact, I don't know if the readers can see it, but even on the cover is basically the center post is the mother with the two side posts, really her children, leaning against the mother as they try to save their lives. So yeah, it was an interesting journey in this book.
Yeah, and I really related to her. Obviously I wasn't undocumented, but I had a similar situation 20 years ago, and that's kind of why I'm disabled now. But so it was, and then what you said about the salmon, and I watched this YouTube channel for a very long time about a guy in Alaska, and he talked about the salmon and how where they are, and he had shown, that they are spawning and decomposing at the same time, but they're still alive.
Correct.
And I just thought that, instinct brought them there, and it's like, how did you know where to go? And I think that's something that, every animal has their own life cycle. And I think in some ways people could learn about the animals. And because animals, they don't hunt for sport. They, they hunt for food, or they follow their instincts and as their species and things like that. And, they have this whole life cycle. And if more people would think about that, on, how animals sometimes, I think, are more progressive than humans are. When you think about it, they're not gonna just go out and kill each other just because it's fun or not fun, but um, and sometimes, they like I love penguins because it's the man that takes care of the egg.
Right. Well said. Well
Like,
said.
yes. I actually have a penguin that I'm actually tracking. It was a gift from my son and daughter-in-law. They gave me a tracking bracelet, and then I get to track this penguin, and it's very interesting. See where he goes and things like that. So, um, this, this book was, I loved all of your books, and this one kind of just, it stood out with me, and I really enjoyed reading it. And the characters, even the ones that are unlikable, and they're supposed to be, and and they're not the kind where you love to hate. They're just, oh, guy's a big jerk or other things. But I don't swear on the show, and I don't really swear much in real life unless I'm really angry. um, but so when you sit down, put pen to paper, and it could be any way that you write.
Mhm.
Actually, how do you write? Is it do you type it? Do you write it out? Or I'm just
Yes,
curious.
that's an excellent question because I go back in my life and I'm old enough to remember, handwriting things out and the typewriters and trying to, white out things and all the rest. I think word processing and computers is probably one of the greatest gifts to man. No, winters are very long here in New England, and I spend the time to really did an awful lot of studying, and John Gardner once said that you have to put yourself into a fictional dream in order to write appropriately, because what I write, I want you to be able to feel and hear.
Right.
That's that same experience that I'm trying to embellish. So I do that, and I get to know the characters as I'm writing, as I'm sure you do. And the more I get to know them, the more they direct me in terms of where the story's headed. I do not know where the story will end.
That's the same with me. I never know where
Yeah,
the story's gonna end.
yes, which
I
is
love it.
exciting, right? And that's the way. And I will say too, as I've said to other writers that I've worked with, the writing part is fun. It's certainly creative. It's the editing that is
Yes.
mind-numbing sometimes, right? Because you write a story, then you have to rewrite it, 10 times. But it's in that process that you continue to um, polish and polish and polish it again. What I found in Secret Seeds, which was a real epiphany for me, is that I actually got to listen to the audition tapes for the audio version. And this wonderful, wonderful woman out in Wyoming that lives on a ranch narrated Secret Seeds. And I was just amazed that she could put so much feeling and emphasis in it, and all the different characters and voices, and keep them straight throughout the entire book. And listening to it, it brought me into even an additional insight and an additional depth in terms of what the story is and what the characters are struggling with. So yeah, it's a continuing process. You learn from the characters, right, in terms of what they teach you along the way, and you get to know them as you would one of your family members. And my grandkids, my two grandsons, who I love dearly, they've taught me too that there is no expiration date on imagination, right? And so you write what you know, but you also do a lot of research and a lot of
Yep.
thought process. And sometimes a story will drip out, come quickly, and other days not so much, right? And
Yeah, exactly.
it's all a process.
I always tell people, write what you know, but then also write what you want to know.
Yes.
And that helps you grow as a writer. I mean, I know that I've had characters that, because I love history and I've been recently a historian,
Right.
but I've had characters who were a historian and for
Okay.
their and I did a lot of research. But it was so, a piece of you, no matter how it is, goes into your characters, but then they just get a life of their own. And I like reading my old stuff, not just because I can't remember everything that I've written, but it's like visiting, watching an old reruns of shows that you used to like, and I'm like, wow, character is really a jerk. And then I realized how much fun it is to write for a jerk.
Right, exactly. And you
You know,
love
and
them all differently too, right? You love each book differently because they're like your children. And
oh yeah,
right?
exactly. My first book I wrote, and then 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, and then a couple years ago I stopped at volume 67.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, so every time I would write a story, I'm like, okay, this is the last one. I would write other stuff, and then I kept going back, and then it became just very large, 67 volumes, and then I had 9 bonus books. Because a
Nice.
couple of them, I'm like, what if this happened a different way? What was the turning point for one particular moment, like for this couple, whether they got together or they didn't get together? And what would have changed? So then I did an alternate version of that, and I found that it was really interesting. But I just kept going back to them, and I just a story about a whole town. And I just
Wow.
love that. And I've switched to history and children's books. And I just think I think more adults should read children's books.
Yes.
You learn a lot. I've read books, and I'm like, oh, I remember when I was a kid. I mean, I thought watching Stranger Things was kind of
Ah,
weird because I
yes.
grew up in the 80s.
Yes.
Like, yes, I wore that hair. But, I find it so interesting how writers in general, they have their own way about them. Some like to do the outline, but they don't always necessarily stick to it. Um, I would start out, sometimes I would write in a notebook and then type stuff out and just kind of getting my thoughts on paper. And I always find it interesting on how people, when they sit down to write, what do they need all the time? With me, I always needed music, and it depends on what I'm writing.
Okay.
I was writing for this, it was a male character, lead character. And so I love Frank Sinatra. So I would play, when I was writing that, I would play that music for him while I do it. Now I listen to pretty much anything, but a lot of Elvis because it makes me connect with my dad.
Ah,
He could
nice.
he could sing like Elvis.
Wow.
He was really good because he could drop, his voice and then raise it back up. He didn't dance like him, but he could sing like him. Um, so what is it that, you know, your story behind your story? Like, what do you do when you sit down to write? Do you have a scheduled time? Do you just ideas and say, oh, yeah, stop what I'm doing, right? Or how does that work?
Well, excellent question. It's especially this time of year, I try to I try to certainly dedicate a portion of every day to writing. To your point, I'll have kind of a rough outline when I start, and as I continue on, I'll have an Excel spreadsheet to kind of summarize, each chapter
Oh, I love Excel.
and the kind of cliffhanger at the end, and so I can kind of just understand kind of the storyboard of where it's going. But I tend to take a run or take a walk, and in those quiet moments, a lot of the inspiration comes to me. I can hear the characters talking, I can hear them arguing, and I can also, in my mind, kind of think over different plot lines and what really will resonate with people. And I so appreciate, Amy, everything you've done, and for me personally, and your support. I also, certainly I like to write stories that are of interest that people will want to read, that want to turn the page, but I like to embed them with meaning and with epiphanies. And unfortunately, in the world we currently live in, It's so polarized. I try to take a kind of a different tact by having an interesting story and almost as a Trojan horse in some regards,
Yeah.
and try to embed, different messages and epiphanies in that storyline that hopefully, again, without preaching, that people in the quiet of the night, or when they're reflecting on the day after perhaps reading a story that I wrote, then maybe they'll come to a different perspective or think about it a little bit differently. To me, that's the reward. And so it's a process. Like I say, some days it'll come. Other days it's like trying to age a barrel of whiskey or wine, right? It takes time for something to mature, right, and something to age well. So.
Yeah, and I always found that I people call it writer's block, and I always called it story block, because sometimes I'll be in the middle of writing something,
Right.
and then I'll have and I'm like, oh, where is this going? So I put it aside, but yeah, I could always go and have ideas and write something else, and then I'll come back to it.
Yes.
See what happens. And I think that's important too. And I want, just like you, when someone reads my work, for them to think, huh, maybe they'll see something or they'll feel something that they didn't think they could feel. And it might even just change their perspective, not necessarily their opinion on something,
Exactly.
but just perspective. I think that this world has lost the intellectual debate. I'm not talking like political debates, because those are like, okay, my brain's bigger than yours, so to speak. But I like the fact that I miss those, I guess, from debate class, but where you listened to what the other person was saying, and then they listened to what you were saying, and you don't necessarily have to sway them, but at least they listened to you and they respected you for your opinion, whether they agreed or not agreed.
If I could just build on that, because I think your hat, as I said before we began, says it all. So be kind, right? And so even in Secret Seeds, part of the work that I love to do when I'm not writing is, I'm very involved. I'm a conference and district president with the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, which does an awful lot of work in the community for people that, families that have facing eviction, they have no heat, no electricity, no food. And, in this world, I used to think growing up that, especially in the United States, that there was a wonderful safety net. Well, there's a lot of holes in that net, right? And what I try to show in Secret Seeds is that there is kindness out there. There are organizations that are there to help people during those difficult times. And I think, to your point, showing a little kindness is certainly needed in today's world. Yeah,
I totally agree. My mother, even though we had my dad there, he was kind of like a figurehead.
yeah.
And my mom was, she raised us. There was 5 of us, and she taught me and so much. And I grew up poor, but we always had food on the table. Even, I mean, back then it was cheap for like chicken and ground beef,
Right.
but my mom could make anything out of that and make it taste good. She had like 1,000 recipes in her head for chicken, and the stuff that she could do with ground beef was pretty amazing. And, every once in a while we were able to have cereal for dinner, and we thought that was great. But she always taught me by her behavior to be kind, not judge people until, judge people based off of how they treat you, not necessarily what they look like. And even first impressions, never go by that, because sometimes a person's just having a really bad day.
Well said.
And I don't judge people. I've had a lot of, I think my sons get very overprotective when they'll go out in public with me and they'll see somebody like trying to hurry past me because I'm in my chair, or roll their eyes at me or say something under their breath, and they get very defensive, and I'll be like, I'm used to it. And they're like, Mom, you shouldn't be used to it. And it's true. It's just, I just kind of, I'm not going to confront somebody just because they're a jerk, and or worse. But I think it's just, if you just be kind. I always found that in customer service when I used to work in a call center, and people would be angry because we didn't accept a certain credit card. And they'd be yelling and swearing, and I just sit back and finish when they're done. And then I'm like, how can I help you?
Mm.
And then when they realized that I wasn't going to argue back, they calmed down or they hung up. So like they wanted to start a fight, and some people just want to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I think that, when I read your book, and as I read everybody's book, I take notes as I go along. And so I can remember what the points I want to make in the review. I had an author that he's an international best-selling author and one of my favorites. And I had him on the show, and he told me that he never gives interviews and doesn't promote his work, but he liked my reviews and he compared them to Edgar Allan Poe's reviews.
Wow.
Because he was a literary critic. He said, that's the way you wrote your book, or wrote reviews. And he told me sometimes my reviews are better than the book itself. And it was honor. I was like a big fangirl. I couldn't, I was so excited that he said yes, because he never gives interviews, and they got him hooked up with me. He's like, definitely, I'm going to be on her show. And he was just an older man that just loved what he was doing. And he's like, my publisher will do the promoting. I don't do much of, because I don't do promoting. A lot of people see my cover and it draws to them. And so with that, I changed a lot of my covers to not mimic his, but, be more vibrant and eye-catchy.
Mm-hmm.
Because when they say don't judge a book by its cover, they're not talking about books, they're talking about people. And that is definitely something true. Don't judge people by their covers. But I really want to thank you for being on the show, and I hope you'll be on the show again. I loved having you here, and it was so great to meet you face to face. And I'll just do a little wrap up, but thank you so much for being on the show, and audience, thank you for listening. If you wish to be a guest on the show, go to amysbookshelfreviews.com/podcast and schedule your pre-recording. Don't forget, if you wish to comment on this show or any show, comments are available and I do read them. Join me again next week for another great conversation. Follow this podcast on Spotify. And if you want to check out my work, just Google me. I'm Amy Shannon. Be safe, be well, and always be kind.
Thank you for watching this video podcast. Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast is a takeoff of Amy's Bookshelf Reviews website, and which does reviews and also author promotions. You can go to amysbookshelfreviews.com for more information. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe, follow, and keep listening. Thank you.